What's going on, guys? We are here at Calgary Barbell. As promised, as we've been talking about for a while, we've had a couple people ask about this one, so we're gonna do a how-to sumo deadlift video. So a couple things I wanna go through. First off is gonna be positioning, which I believe is paramount to the sumo deadlift. If you don't have positioning, and if you can't maintain that position, you're not gonna be able to sumo deadlift very well. The second thing I wanna go through is just a bunch of common mistakes. So a lot of mistakes I see in my athletes, mistakes I make myself, the mistakes I see people make on their training footage on Instagram or YouTube or whatever that gets sent to me. So the top things that I will correct in other people. So the first most important thing, like I said, is gonna be positioning. So that's the first thing we're gonna work on here. For myself, I take a moderately wide stance. Now before my hip injury, before some of that stuff, I was going a little bit wider where my toes were almost at the plates. I've found a little bit more of a compact stance is a little bit easier on my hips. And allows me to get into a bit of a better position. So what I do is I line up my shins with the rings on the bar. That's often a good starting point. I recommend for most people, or at least for a large number of people, that's a really good place to start. My toe angle is going to be somewhat representative of how far out my knees are. If you're gonna turn your toes way out, your knees better be able to get as far out. What we want is we want nice stacked joints. We want the knee pointing in the same direction as the toe. The next thing to worry about is going to be setting your lower leg and then pulling tension into your hips. So for me, I will reach down and grab the bar. What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to open everything up back behind the bar. We'll talk about this in a little more depth later, but we don't want to let our knees forward in front of the bar. We end up squatting it up too much. We don't use as much of the posterior chain, which kind of defeats the purpose of a lot of sumo. So once you have your stance and your width set, the next thing you want to do is essentially pull yourself into position. What I'll do is I'll reach down, grab onto the bar, I'll set my shins so they're straight up and down, and then all of the tension goes in behind that. As you pull your hips down and you pull your back flat, we don't want to allow the knees to travel forward over the bar. What we want to do is we want to keep the knees straight up and down. We want to pull all that tension in behind the bar, almost like you're going to fall over if you were to let go of the bar. That's going to create a lot of tension through your posterior chain and allow you to stay nice and upright as you execute your deadlift. The next thing that's going to have a big impact on your positioning is going to be your grip width. I see a lot of guys try to go way too narrow on the sumo deadlift, and it makes it really hard to get your back flat, get your shoulders into position the way you want them. Essentially, we want to be able to create a flat back position where we're pulling the shoulders down, almost like you're trying to pinch your armpits shut to get your lats active, to keep your chest leading the deadlift, and to keep yourself from losing your back position as you come off the floor. So essentially what that's going to look like is we're going to take our grip, knees go out until the shins are straight up and down, then all the tension pulls in behind the bar, flatten the back, and push straight up the front, squeeze the glutes through. So common issues in the sumo deadlift. One of them being losing your back position off the floor. A lot of times what you'll see is you'll see people go to start their deadlift, their back will round a little bit, and then they'll kind of stiff leg it off the floor. They'll get to about here in their lockout, won't be able to pull their back through, and they'll miss a sumo deadlift at lockout, which if you're executing with technical proficiency should really almost never happen, but we want to try to avoid that, especially at lighter weights, because it's a bad habit to get into, and it's an easy one to correct as long as you're willing to take maybe a step or two back. Make sure you're working with appropriate weights for your technique. So when you lose your back off the floor, it's essentially because you're trying to rush and you're not sticking with the amount of tension or the amount of pressure it's going to take to get the bar off the floor in good position. It's easier to break the floor if you lose your back, but you're gonna miss at lockout. So what it looks like to lose your back off the floor is like this. So you're gonna get set properly, everything looks good, and then we're up here, and then we get stuck here and don't have the back strength to push through. Everything's locked, the hips are locked, so you can't use those to lock out. All you have left is to smush your back through. That is not ideal. So what we want is we want to make it harder off the floor by being a little bit more patient, keeping back behind the bar and keeping that back flat. We want to think about pushing down and pushing out to each side of your body. So we're going to pull in, maintain tension, maintain technique. As you can see, the bar's almost floating there because of how hard I'm pulling in on the bar. We want to make sure we create enough tension to keep good position before the bar comes off the floor. So pull in, keep the back flat, nice and tall, and the glutes lock. As you can see, my back's tight, the glutes lock. As opposed to back rounded, glutes lock, still not locked out. Another really big mistake that I see way too often is I see people pull themselves down to try and get their hips way too low, and it causes their knees to travel in front of the bar. When we're looking at the barbell, we want the shins straight up and down, so all that tension is back, creating better leverage for yourself. If you let your knees forward, you're gonna be doing a lot of quad work off the floor, or chances are, you're just gonna kick your butt back anyways and stiff leg it from a less than optimal position. So I'll show you what we do want and what we don't want. So if you film your own lifts, you can see from the side and tell this one was good, this one was bad, how to fix it, etc. So the proper way, our shins are gonna be pretty much straight up and down from the bar, not leading out in front of it, and all the tension is gonna be pulled back. Now the improper way, and this is the way that I started doing it when I very first started sumo deadlifting, it was something that when I fixed, led to huge leaps and bounds in my strength levels and in my ability to execute the lift. The improper way is when you pull your hips down to let your knees go forward like that. Now, I'm out of position, my knees are gonna push the bar forward. It's gonna change the bar path because now the bar needs to go around your knees, or your butt's gonna kick back and you're gonna end up in pretty much a stiff leg position. So the last big issue that I see a lot of times is people playing with their hip height. And this can be a really tricky thing, and it can also be a thing that just takes practice and takes trial and error. In order to find your hip height, we first need to make sure that the shin angle is correct. If the shin angle is relatively vertical, relatively straight up and down, then we're gonna be able to pull our back flat, keeping the shin angle the way it is, and you're gonna find your hip height right there. You shouldn't need to drop your hips or raise your hips. And ideally, when we start the pull, we don't want our hips to raise or lower. We wanna start from where we set them. So as we pull in, we're creating tension through the lats, pulling all that tension in, and then we're gonna use that to break the floor. We want that bar path straight up and down, push off the floor. The deadlift is often mistaken as a full pull. But if you can get in the habit of actually pushing the bar off the floor to start it, you're gonna be able to maintain a much better torso position, which is gonna allow you to finish the lift better. So, just like in the conventional, in the sumo deadlift, we wanna start with a push off the floor until the bar comes just past the knees, and then we wanna squeeze the glutes and lock out standing tall. One more thing I wanna touch on that I see sometimes is people giving too much hips in the sumo deadlift. In the conventional deadlift, if we give too much hips, the chances of the knees unlocking are a little bit less, I find. But if you push your hips too far forward and really over-exaggerate your lockout, it can be really hard to keep your knees properly locked. So if you're in a federation that's strict about knee lockout, make sure you're squeezing your quads and thinking up with your lockout as opposed to back. We don't want any of that lean, because as you can tell from the side angle right now, my knees are coming unlocked when I lean. So if we can think about locking up, squeezing the quads, as opposed to locking forward and using too much hips through the lockout, we're gonna have much more success. We're gonna get more white lights on those sumo deadlifts. Let me know if this was helpful for you guys. Like and subscribe. If the video was helpful, share it with your friends, get it out there, and let's continue to make some good content and help everybody lift heavier weights better.